Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Garry Pierre-Pierre. Since he took office, immigration advocates have been pushing President Obama to place immigration policy higher on his agenda. Now, the administration says it plans to push for comprehensive immigration reform before the end of the year. Organized labor will, of course, play an important role in any discussions on reform. And recently, the country's two major labor federations announced an agreement on immigration policy. On this edition of Independent Sources, we explore what these developments could mean for swift legislation on immigration and the role the ethnic media could play. To commemorate Earth Day, we focus on an organization that fights for environmental justice in a neighborhood in Brooklyn. We look at how El Diario's story on some homeless workers led to a safer haven. And we visit a news service that offers an alternative view from Africa. We'll have these stories and other news of the week after this.
My interest in farmers market really has to do with preserving local food traditions and this kind of thing. I know other people are interested in reducing their carbon footprint, but by and large it's all making sure that we have a sustainable system so that for future generations we have something to give them.
I think about our responsibility to the earth, our planet, and to the environment. And I think it's also important for parents to set a model for their children so that their children also feel that responsibility.
In the last week, the push for immigration reform has gained some momentum. President Obama says he wants Congress to pass legislation this year. Organized labor says it's reached an accord. To take a look at these proposals and the players, I'm joined by three guests. Samir Asher is a professor at the CUNY Law School and has written about immigrants and labor. Francis Liu is a field coordinator with the New York Immigration Coalition, and Juana Ponce de León is executive director of the New York Community Media Alliance. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Samir, big labor traditionally has viewed immigrants and immigration reform somewhat suspiciously. What's happening now?
Well, you're right. It's been a fraught relationship between labor and immigrants, really, over the last 50 years. And as recently as the mid-90s, labor was not really down with immigrants. They weren't supportive of immigrants' rights. But with the sort of ascension of John Sweeney and a new regime,
he's the head of the AFL-CIO.
The AFL-CIO. They've really become much more open to the idea of allying themselves with labor. A couple of things. One is demographic shifts within the United States make it clear that in order for labor to revive and grow again, it needs to include immigrants in its ranks. And second is the idea that the plight of immigrant workers and those who are under, who don't have status or who are being paid under the table affect the conditions of legal workers. That is, if you have a large influx of undocumented workers who are able to, who employers are able to exploit, it really doesn't do anything for union members, non-union members, any American citizen worker. And I think they've come to that understanding. And now it's a matter of working out on what terms there's going to be some kind of reform.
Francis, how significant is this coming together with these two unions?
I think it's huge. I mean, in the past immigration reform fights, there has been discord between different labor unions, and so this sign of them coming together before legislation is introduced and saying, look, we're willing to work together on this. We're willing to put our weight behind it and really make this happen is a game changer for immigration reform, and it really happening this year.
I want to quote from the Vice President for Labor, Immigrant, and Employee Benefit at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. His name is Randall Johnson, and he says, quote, "If the union think they're going to push a bill through without the support of the business community, they're crazy." Does he have a point?
The last bill that went up, the McCain-Kennedy bill that was up a few years ago that died in the Senate, Change to Win and the AFL were divided. The AFL was not supportive of a guest worker program. Change to Win was. The Chamber of Commerce, their main goal here is to try to, again, as I said, get an influx of temporary workers who would effectively undermine, the rights of workers in the United States who are already here. And so I don't know if it's imperiled, because it was imperiled then. You know, the legislation died even when the Chamber of Commerce was on the same side as one of the units of big labor. Okay. But I think that this changes the starting place for the negotiations that are going to be ongoing between all the different parties, and it really strengthens the kind of the labor voice in those negotiations. Okay.
Juana, I want to again read another quote from the communications director at the National Immigration Forum, in which he says, and I quote again, "Ethnic media is going to play a crucial role in the reform. They are a secret weapon. They can keep the community informed, provided with accurate information, and share what their readers can do to plug in the reforms." Is the ethnic media really a secret weapon?
Well, it's not a secret to us, but I mean, I think what she's meaning to say is that the reach of the ethnic media is so much more intimate, so much deeper, and so much more profound for two reasons. One, that they do service neighborhoods, and that the people that are the makers of this media oftentimes are the community leaders themselves. So information coming through them is to a certain extent vetted.
And on Friday, are you organizing, you're leading an event. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, when we heard about this momentous coming together of SEIU and AFL-CIO to, you know, unite behind immigration reform, you know, it gets announced in Washington, D.C., and because we're here in New York, and there's, you know, what, 40% of the population in New York City is immigrant, we figured that it would be very good to bring labor leaders and advocates to a panel discussion with the ethnic media, so that they would be able to ask their questions and be able to report directly to their communities, rather than what tends to happen in general, which is looking at what mainstream media has said and then some sort of adaptation of what that is and report it into the community.
Okay. Now, let's step back a little bit and look at it from a policy standpoint. I mean, some people think that the Obama administration would not bring this so early in his administration, that the immigration, last administration, it was a wedge issue because of the way the debate was framed. So right now, is he taking a risk by bringing this issue to the forefront?
Well, I think that immigrants came out in droves in November, and they heard his campaign commitment that he was going to address immigration reform. He was going to fix the immigration system in his first year, and a lot of people came out on that promise. And so I think that it's critical now that he's showing up and he's addressing that and saying, I'm going to actually work for it. And while there are critics out there who would say, you know, it's not the right time, you know, other things should take priority, I think that it shows some leadership on his part, that he recognizes that fixing the immigration system goes hand in hand with recovering the economy. Okay. And so it is time, and the time is right now. So.
Is this, to use a phrase, we march today, we vote tomorrow? You think he's listening to this, Samir?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think voters were mobilized. I think community leaders were mobilized. It's significant that Obama got a lot of Latino votes, in spite of the fact that McCain was a major proponent of immigration reform as well. But I want to, you know, take pains to say that, and I think ethnic media and community newspapers really do this really well, thinking critically about the policy shifts. We keep talking about fixing the system, and it will, this measure, if passed, the best measure, might go some of the way towards fixing some of the problems. But as long as there's a border and there's inequality, you know, between the sending countries and the receiving country, there's going to continue to be undocumented immigration. There's going to continue to be undocumented folks who are really kind of in conditions of misery in some way. And so this is really more the start of a mobilization, with this comprehensive immigration reform as the first step in what hopefully is a larger agenda that we're going to have to keep pushing Obama and whoever succeeds him for.
Well, you know, I mean, ethnic media, I mean, they're not being wowed over. I mean, there has been a great deal of in the editorials from many different communities wondering whether, in fact, this is going to take place, and so that on the editorial page, and on the news side, reporting on the deportations that continue, that have been actually increased,
right.
reporting on more labor abuse, the rise of violence against immigrants. So, you know, they are steeped in the reality. You know, so something very substantive is going to have to happen. So, by that measure, I think that there's a lot of critical thinking going on.
Samir, you talk about immigration and a border way, but it's more than just the border. Francis, it's about Eastern European immigrants. You have the Irish. So, what kind of policy will come out of this immigration reform, if you will?
Well, I think advocates are pushing for an overhaul of the immigration system, and that includes providing a path to citizenship for the undocumented people who are here. It includes addressing family unity and the backlogs that are keeping families separated. It includes workers' rights and really leveraging the rights of all workers to create a level playing field. It includes addressing the deportations and the detention systems, which are really violating due process rights. And it includes addressing how future workers will come into this country and how we're going to decide that as a nation. And so I think there are a lot of different aspects to it, but in reality, just fixing one of those pieces, as Samir said, won't fix the whole system unless we actually address the whole system.
Can I just add one more thing,
Sure.
which is the way differently situated different countries are treated differently in the immigration system. So it's almost like there's an affirmative action program right now for how should I put it, immigrants from countries that don't send us people of color, basically, right? Immigrants of color are disadvantaged in the system. Of course, there's much greater of a need for those countries, generally more economically deprived and indigent, to send folks here. They hit the caps much earlier, whereas immigrants from Europe and other places don't hit the caps. We don't even get as many, immigrants from those countries. So hopefully at some point we'll also be addressing the kind of racially discriminatory nature of the immigration system.
And I'm sure, Juana, the ethnic or the independent press will be front and center in disseminating that information.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. I think that they are totally fine-tuned into what's happening in that. I mean, I think that the framing of the whole immigration thing has been very Latinoized because in 2006, when everyone was very surprised that there were so many people, that there was actually an alternative media system in place that could mobilize millions of people, and that the Latinos actually took a very leadership role in that situation. But what you say is, I see it every day.
Unfortunately, we have to leave at that. Samir Asher from the CUNY Law School, thanks for being with us. Juana Ponce de León from the New York Community Media Alliance, and Francis Liu from the New York Immigration Coalition. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now here's Abi Ishola with some other news.
Thanks, Gary. Here's a look at some headlines from New York's ethnic media. From India abroad, many Indians fear 2 new White House appointees may complicate the country's nuclear deal with the U.S. The Obama administration recently handpicked Dr. Garry Samore and Ellen Tauscher, both opponents of the United States-Indian Civilian Nuclear Cooperation Agreement. Dr. Samore told India Abroad that though he opposes the deal, he wouldn't seek to dismantle it. From Caribbean Life, Guyana is the latest to be hit by the global economic crisis. The Chinese bauxite miner company, Bazai Minerals, plans to lay off over 100 people from its staff of 600 workers. From the Filipino Reporter, a 35-member panel wants illegal immigrants in New Jersey to pay in-state college tuition and have driver's licenses. The state's governor, John Corzine, says he supports the potential tuition plan, but he's hesitant to support legal driving for illegal immigrants. Editors of the Irish Echo are calling a recent New York Times story overly pessimistic. The Times story attributes the dwindling number of participants in the Irish Games at Gaelic Park in the Bronx to the decrease in the number of Irish immigrants in New York. But the Echo contends that this is only on the senior level, and the Times failed to show the surge in participation at the youth level. And finally, a famous Irish healer is bringing his healing powers to New York. Michael O'Doherty, a bioenergy therapist known for healing patients from rare medical conditions, will teach bioenergy seminars to people who want to learn the technique. O'Doherty has been practicing alternative healing for the past 20 years. Those were just a few stories from the ethnic media. Back to you, Garry.
Today is Earth Day, first commemorated 39 years ago to encourage awareness and appreciation for our environment and to promote healthy ways to sustain it. This has not always been easy in immigrant and ethnic communities. These neighborhoods have often been hit harder by air pollution, toxic dumping, and other hazards than other urban areas. Joining me to discuss the issue of environmental justice is Soledad Gaztambide from UPROSE. UPROSE is a community-based organization of social activists in the Sunset Park neighborhood of Brooklyn. Soledad, welcome.
Thank you, Garry.
Talk to me about UPROSE work on environmental issues.
Well, basically we work through organizing advocacy as well as developing indigenous leadership, intergenerational indigenous leadership in reducing, to reduce pollution, to increase open space, as well as facilitate more partnerships between community and community-based planning, as well as...
Give us an example of some of the partnership you've had in that end.
I think the most successful one was a concept plan that came for a Greenway, Blueway. This is going to be part of a greater... Greenway is a pedestrian bicycle open space plan for Brooklyn, and they came together to try to bring people from all different areas of the community to visualize what that could look like and what they would want.
You know, Sunset Park is a community that's been hit really hard by the environmental problems facing the city, and it's interesting that in researching UPROSE that it was one of the first, I suppose, or if not the only one, minority environmental issues. How did that happen? How did that come about, that one of the few organizations in the community working on environmental issues?
Actually, UPROSE didn't start specifically as an environmental organization. It's the first Latino community-based organization, and it changed a bit in '96. And I think the executive director at that point saw that one of the immediate crises was an environmental. It had to do with power plant sightings. And because of that, it was a social issue, but it was also environmental, and basically the community organized around that, and that's how it took that path.
One of the terms that I came across in doing some research on the issue is something they call environmental justice. Tell us a little bit more about what that means.
The term environmental justice, I think, comes not as a counterpart, but a following that is about environment dealing more with people and how our urban environment mostly affects our health and our quality of life. I think environmentalism, especially in the United States, not in other places so much, started as a conservationist, and people had ideas of saving forests, or and I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think they're very much related, but environmental justice deals, and especially because low-income communities and communities of colors have tended to have not only disproportionate impacts, but cumulative ones related to environmental burdens.
Okay. Like we said, it's Earth Day. What are you guys doing to commemorate Earth Day, some of the activities?
Well, actually, the activity we're holding is at MS 88, a middle school, the local middle school, and we're trying to put together arts and culture as well as environmental justice education. And Cece, one of our staff members, is also an artist in conjunction with Joaquin, and they're doing a mural at the school with the kids. The kids are actually painting the mural, but she's facilitating the event.
Of course, the theme being Earth Day, and so what kind of art are you doing that's promoting?
I think usually what they try to do is think about our community in particular and what are the things that affect us, and probably do that visually, and maybe it'll probably have like a positive side of it, you know, what we can do.
We'll have to leave it at that. Soledad Gaztambide from UPROSE, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
If you have children or grandchildren, you might care. You might want them to have a planet so they can run around and play and enjoy the things that we've enjoyed coming up.
Yeah, like if we destroy the environment, like pollute the air, destroy the ozone layer, pollute the waters, all that, we're going to eventually run out of resources for ourselves.
We want a bright future, a happy future. We want to live in concert with the earth and not against it.
When El Diario La Prensa published a piece about a group of day laborers forced to live underneath an abandoned house, it was picked up by news organizations like CNN. The story coverage crossed language lines and led to an outpouring of help for the homeless man. Abi Ishola has more.
Israel Rodriguez's story in America began 5 years ago. He left El Salvador to work in the U.S. to support his family back home. But his plans stalled last fall when he was forced to live beneath the porch of this abandoned house and bathe in the murky waters of the canal next door.
Estaba aquí y nosotros entrábamos allí y nos entrábamos a dormir allí todos juntos.
Rodriguez is one of several Central American immigrants in Plainfield, New Jersey, who fell on hard times when the U.S. economy took a nosedive. Plainfield's unemployment rate is up over 2% from last fall, making it one of the highest in Central Jersey. Jobs are scarce for day laborers like Rodriguez, so many have been forced to move into small holes scattered across the city. The living conditions here were so awful, it earned the name Cueva del Diablo, or Devil's Cave.
Era muy triste porque allí aguantábamos frío, hambre y a veces íbamos a los containers a sacar para comer.
¿Va a trabajar?
Carmen Salavierta, a volunteer who advocates for day laborers in the community, found out about Devil's Cave and acted immediately. She contacted politicians, community workers, and El Diario La Prensa, one of the largest daily newspapers serving the Hispanic community.
El Diario has been really working with the community for many years. Like they really, any problems come up, they always there to be exposed to what is happening.
Devil's Cave became a front-page story for El Diario in January. Eva Sanchez, the Metro News editor for the paper, says the story highlights a critical issue in ethnic communities.
I think for us it's very important to see the impact that the economic crisis is having on the most vulnerable population, such as Hispanic immigrant workers and day laborers and undocumented workers.
Several news outlets, including CNN, later followed El Diario's lead. How does that make you feel to know that people are picking up from small community papers and taking them to mainstream media?
It's just like so rewarding for us because it's our community, and basically I think our goal is to have a voice for these people, you know, who don't have a voice.
Many who felt connected to the coverage on Devil's Cave were moved to action.
And from there, a lot of people call and they want to help. They want to know what they can do, how they can give us a hand.
She used those donations to rent this small basement apartment for Rodriguez and 4 other men from Devil's Cave. She manages to round up monthly donations to cover their rent.
This March is not paying yet. I still have $300 left to pay, so I have to put it together. But I know it's going to come and people help, but they're very good.
Rodriguez, who recently started a steady job, can now lend a hand to maintain the place he now calls home.
En la cueva no, ni por cerca.
So the case was not even near the way it is here now. So.
He's thankful to members of the community and the media for his second chance in America. Abi Ishola for Independent Sources.
Gracias a Dios, a Carmencita y a todos ustedes y la demás gente.
We'll be right back after this.
We as a nation, we need to eat better and healthier and stop this thing with obesity in teenagers and everything like that. But even if it's just regular farm products, having it come directly from the farm into your kitchen table, it's 100% better than going to the grocery store.
Global Information Network is an alternative news service with a special focus on Africa. It hopes to change the image of Africa so it will no longer be viewed as a disease and poverty-ridden continent of failed states. Judith Escalona reports on some of the organization's activities, including a talk with the author of a controversial book that advocates phasing out aid to the continent.
In Manhattan, at Global Information Network, journalists, academics, and others wait for Dambisa Moyo to arrive. Her controversial book, Dead Aid, calls for ending aid to Africa.
It's virtually impossible to delink aid from bad leadership. In the book, I say that aid makes good leaders bad and bad leaders worse.
Today's gathering is part of Global's new initiative to break the grossly distorted image of Africa as the dark, poverty-stricken, and war-torn continent. Almost on a weekly basis, Global presents some of the best minds of Africa on issues.
The last thing I'll say about the celebrity culture and the media is that it's completely grounded in negativity. Which investor is going to want to rush into an economy to invest when it's always portrayed, as you said earlier, the four horsemen of Africa? It's a negative place. It seems to be a basket case. Nobody wants to invest in that type of an environment.
Global Information Network is an alternative news service providing news and information about the developing world. It was a branch of Interpress Service, a much larger news agency with headquarters in Rome, Italy, and was called Interlink before it became a separate service 25 years ago.
Covering the UN, covering so many issues.
Since then, Global Information Network has increasingly focused on Africa as more African American newspapers become subscribers. Executive Director Lisa Vivas explains.
One of our first major subscribers was the Final Call. This is the Louis Farrakhan paper, and it used to be too hot to touch. You know, it was so controversial, but the black press read it, and they saw these stories, and we had stories from Cuba. We had stories from the Middle East, and so we got calls from other papers, you know, how can we find out about this service and see the stories you have? So that's how we began working with the black press.
News is distributed in English and Spanish, and clients span the 50 states, many using the service without Global knowing. While revenue streams are important, for Vivas, getting information out to the public is even more critical.
Most of the ethnic media is weekly, so we're working with print primarily, so we send them something per week. Maybe we pick out, you know, some of the top stories that we feel. We send out the Africa News Briefs, which is 4 or 5 short pieces between 100 and 200 words, but just, you know, fits well for the papers that we work with. And then if they want more, they can come to the website.
With an expanding program of presentations and a new staff of volunteers, Global Information Network is planning its next 20 years as an alternative news service. For Independent Sources, I'm Judith Escalona.
That's our show. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week. In the meantime, be independent-minded.